Lisa sat nervously in the witness stand, her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. The courtroom was filled with an air of anticipation, as all eyes turned towards her. This was her moment to share her harrowing ordeal, to finally have her voice heard. As she took a deep breath, Lisa's mind flashed back to that fateful night, the night of desperation that had changed her life forever. She began to recount the events, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I remember feeling lost and hopeless," Lisa began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had reached a point where I saw no way out, no escape from the pain that consumed me. It was on that night that I made the decision to end my own life." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of Lisa's words hanging in the air. She continued, her voice gaining strength. "But before I could carry out my plan, a man appeared out of nowhere. He kidnapped me, took away my freedom, and subjected me to unspeakable horrors." Lisa's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. "He violated me in ways that no human being should ever have to endure." The room was filled with a collective gasp, the gravity of Lisa's testimony sinking in. The prosecutor stood up, his voice filled with determination. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Lisa's testimony is not just about her own personal tragedy. It is about the pursuit of justice, the search for truth, and the fight against evil," he declared. Lisa's eyes met the detective's gaze, the one person who had believed in her from the beginning. She felt a glimmer of hope, knowing that her words were finally being taken seriously. "I begged for mercy, pleaded for my life, and miraculously, he released me," Lisa continued, her voice trembling with both fear and gratitude. "I returned home, desperate to find solace and support, but no one believed me. No one except Detective Anderson." The courtroom turned its attention to Detective Anderson, who sat stoically in the gallery. He had been the one to connect the dots, to see the similarities between Lisa's ordeal and the string of unsolved cases that had plagued the city for months. Lisa's voice grew stronger as she recounted the disbelief she faced upon sharing her story with her family and friends. She described the pain of being dismissed, of feeling like her trauma was being invalidated. But Detective Anderson listened. "He believed me when no one else did." Lisa's voice quivered with a mix of gratitude and determination. "He saw the connection between my kidnapper and the serial killer the police had been desperately searching for." The defense attorney rose to cross-examine Lisa, attempting to undermine her credibility. But Lisa stood her ground, her voice unwavering, as she recounted the details of her captivity, the fear that had consumed her, and the strength she had found within herself to survive. As Lisa's testimony came to an end, the courtroom erupted in a mix of emotions. Some were moved to tears, others clenched their fists in anger. But through it all, Lisa remained resolute, knowing that her words had the power to bring justice to not only herself, but to the countless victims who had suffered at the hands of her kidnapper. As she stepped down from the witness stand, Lisa felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had shared her truth, her story, and now it was up to the jury to decide the fate of the man who had forever changed her life. Little did she know that her testimony would be the turning point in the trial, the catalyst that would bring the monster to justice and provide closure for so many others. Lisa's bravery and resilience had become a beacon of hope, a whisper of mercy in a world that so desperately needed it. The courtroom was filled with an air of anticipation as the trial of Lisa McVeigh's kidnapper began. The accused sat stoically in the defendant's chair, his eyes darting around the room, seemingly unaffected by the gravity of the situation. Lisa, on the other hand, sat nervously in the witness stand, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared to recount the horrors she had endured. The prosecutor stood up, his voice resonating with determination as he addressed the jury. He painted a vivid picture of the events that had unfolded on that fateful night, describing the terror and anguish Lisa had experienced at the hands of her captor. He emphasized the physical and emotional trauma she had endured, highlighting the lasting impact it had on her life. The prosecution presented a compelling case, meticulously piecing together the evidence gathered by the police during their investigation. They showcased the forensic evidence, including DNA samples and fingerprints, which linked the accused to the crime scene. The prosecutor also called upon witnesses who had seen the accused in the vicinity of Lisa's abduction, further strengthening their case. The defense attorney rose to his feet, his voice calm and measured as he began his opening statement. He acknowledged the seriousness of the charges against his client, but argued that the evidence presented by the prosecution was circumstantial at best. He questioned the reliability of the witnesses and suggested that there may be other plausible explanations for the presence of the accused near the crime scene. The defense attorney sought to cast doubt on Lisa's credibility, suggesting that her traumatic experience may have clouded her recollection of events. He argued that her emotional state at the time of the incident could have influenced her perception of the accused. The defense also hinted at the possibility of mistaken identity, raising the question of whether the right person was on trial. As the prosecution called Lisa to the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. Lisa took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage within her, and began to recount the harrowing details of her abduction. She described the fear and helplessness she felt as her captor subjected her to unspeakable acts of violence. Her voice trembled, but her resolve remained unshakable. Lisa's testimony was a powerful and emotional account of her ordeal. She spoke of the moments when she thought all hope was lost and how she found the strength to keep fighting for her life. Her words resonated with the jury, who listened intently, their eyes filled with empathy and compassion. The prosecution presented a wealth of evidence to support Lisa's testimony. They showcased the physical evidence collected from the crime scene, including DNA samples that matched the accused. They also presented phone records and surveillance footage that placed the accused in the vicinity of the abduction. Expert witnesses were called to the stand to testify about the psychological trauma experienced by victims of such heinous crimes. They explained the impact of trauma on memory and emphasized that inconsistencies in Lisa's recollection were not uncommon given the circumstances. The defense, in turn, sought to challenge the validity of the evidence presented by the prosecution. They questioned the chain of custody of the DNA samples, suggesting the possibility of contamination. They also attempted to discredit the expert witnesses, arguing that their testimony was based on subjective interpretations rather than concrete evidence. The defense attorney meticulously cross-examined Lisa, attempting to find inconsistencies in her testimony. He questioned her about the details of the abduction, probing for any discrepancies that could cast doubt on her credibility. Lisa remained composed, answering each question with unwavering resolve. The prosecution called upon witnesses who had seen the accused in the vicinity of the crime scene. They testified to his suspicious behavior and provided crucial information that corroborated Lisa's account. The defense, however, challenged their credibility, suggesting ulterior motives or faulty recollections. As the trial progressed, the courtroom became a battleground of conflicting narratives. The prosecution fought to establish the guilt of the accused beyond a reasonable doubt, while the defense sought to create doubt in the minds of the jury. The fate of Lisa's kidnapper hung in the balance as the trial continued to unfold. As the trial begins for the horrific ordeal that Lisa McVeigh endured, the defense team prepares their strategy to challenge the prosecution's case. They understand the gravity of the charges against their client, but they are determined to present an alternative narrative that will cast doubt on Lisa's testimony and the evidence presented. The defense's primary strategy revolves around questioning Lisa McVeigh's credibility as a witness. They argue that her traumatic experience may have clouded her judgment and memory, leading to inconsistencies in her testimony. The defense team meticulously examines every detail of Lisa's account, searching for any discrepancies that could undermine her credibility in the eyes of the jury. They also delve into Lisa's personal history, looking for any potential motives that could have influenced her to fabricate or exaggerate her story. The defense aims to portray Lisa as an unreliable witness, suggesting that her emotional state and desire for attention may have influenced her recollection of events. Another crucial aspect of the defense's strategy is to challenge the lack of physical evidence linking their client to the crime. They argue that the absence of DNA or other forensic evidence raises reasonable doubt about their client's involvement. The defense team meticulously examines the crime scene investigation reports, looking for any inconsistencies or mishandling of evidence that could cast doubt on its reliability. They also call into question the reliability of any circumstantial evidence presented by the prosecution. The defense argues that without concrete physical evidence directly linking their client to the crime, the jury cannot convict based solely on the victim's testimony. In an effort to create reasonable doubt, the defense team presents alternative suspects who could have been responsible for Lisa's kidnapping and assault. They meticulously investigate the backgrounds of individuals who had access to the crime scene or had a motive to commit such a heinous act. The defense aims to shift the jury's focus away from their client and onto these potential suspects, highlighting any inconsistencies or suspicious behavior that could point to their guilt. The defense team also explores the possibility of a copycat crime, suggesting that Lisa's ordeal may have been perpetrated by someone seeking to imitate the actions of the suspected serial killer. By presenting alternative suspects and scenarios, the defense aims to create doubt in the minds of the jury regarding their client's guilt. To further challenge Lisa's credibility, the defense team seeks a psychological evaluation of the accuser. They argue that Lisa's mental state and history should be thoroughly examined to determine if any underlying factors could have influenced her perception of events. The defense aims to present any psychological vulnerabilities or conditions that could have impacted Lisa's ability to accurately recall the details of her ordeal. By highlighting any potential psychological factors, the defense hopes to cast doubt on the reliability of Lisa's testimony and create a reasonable alternative explanation for her claims. The defense team plans to call upon expert witnesses to challenge the prosecution's case. These experts may include forensic specialists, psychologists, or other professionals who can provide alternative explanations or interpretations of the evidence presented. The defense aims to present a compelling counter-narrative that challenges the prosecution's version of events. Through the use of expert witnesses, the defense hopes to introduce reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury, emphasizing that there are multiple interpretations of the evidence and that their client may not be the only plausible suspect. In their pursuit of justice, the defense team is determined to challenge the prosecution's case at every turn. They aim to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury, presenting alternative narratives, questioning the victim's credibility, and challenging the lack of physical evidence. As the trial unfolds, the defense's strategy will be put to the test, and the fate of their client will hang in the balance. The courtroom was filled with anticipation as the prosecution prepared to present their case against Lisa's kidnapper, the suspected serial killer. The air was heavy with tension, and the eyes of the jury were fixed on the prosecution team, waiting to hear the evidence that would prove the guilt of the accused. The lead prosecutor, Sarah Thompson, stood confidently before the jury, ready to present the compelling evidence that would establish the guilt of the defendant beyond a reasonable doubt. She began by recounting the horrifying ordeal that Lisa had endured at the hands of her kidnapper. With a steady voice, she described the physical and emotional trauma that Lisa had suffered, emphasizing the profound impact it had on her life. Thompson then proceeded to introduce the forensic evidence that linked the accused to the crime. DNA samples collected from the crime scene matched the defendant's, providing a clear connection between him and the heinous act. The prosecution also presented photographs of the location where Lisa had been held captive, showcasing the grim conditions she had endured during her captivity. The prosecution meticulously built their case, presenting a series of witnesses who had crucial information to contribute. Lisa took the stand, bravely recounting the events of her abduction and the subsequent abuse she had endured. Her testimony was powerful and emotionally charged, leaving the jury visibly moved by her strength and resilience. Detective Mark Anderson, the officer who had initially taken an interest in Lisa's story, was called to testify. He detailed the extensive investigation that had led them to the accused, highlighting the connections they had uncovered between the defendant and other unsolved cases of missing girls. The detective's testimony painted a chilling picture of a serial killer who had been operating undetected for far too long. To further strengthen their case, the prosecution called upon expert witnesses who provided their professional opinions on the evidence presented. A forensic psychologist explained the psychological impact of trauma on victims, validating Lisa's emotional state and the credibility of her testimony. A DNA expert testified to the accuracy of the DNA match found at the crime scene, reinforcing the link between the accused and the abduction. The prosecution also introduced a criminal profiler who had extensively studied the patterns and behaviors of serial killers. The profiler drew parallels between the defendant's actions and those of known serial killers, highlighting the similarities in their methods and motives. This testimony served to establish the defendant's modus operandi and further solidify the prosecution's case. As the prosecution neared the end of their case, Sarah Thompson delivered a powerful closing argument. She reminded the jury of the horrific ordeal that Lisa had endured, emphasizing the strength and courage it took for her to come forward and share her story. Thompson urged the jury to consider the overwhelming evidence presented, urging them to deliver a verdict that would bring justice to Lisa and the countless other victims of the accused. With a final plea for the jury to listen to their hearts and the evidence presented, the prosecution concluded their case. The courtroom fell silent as the weight of the trial hung in the air. The jury was left to deliberate, their decision holding the power to bring closure to Lisa and the community, and to ensure that justice was served. The prosecution had presented a compelling case against the accused, with a strong focus on the evidence linking him to the crime and the emotional testimony of Lisa herself. The jury now held the responsibility of carefully considering the evidence and reaching a verdict that would determine the fate of the accused.